For those of you who do not know me, my name is Quentin Harrison. I am a professional music critic, essayist, all-around music nerd, as well as the subject matter expert on the Spice Girls, and also author of Record Redux Spice Girls, 2nd edition. It's one of several books in my Record Redux line. And I'm here this evening just to have a sort of a brief sort of chat, if you will, about the third and so far final Spice Girls record, Forever, which was released 25 years ago on November 6, 2000. And it's an album that I've held in high esteem and with a lot of deep affection since I first got my hands on the record all those years ago when the record was released. But as many of you know, the album met with a bit of a mixed reception at the time. There was a lot of things happening both internally within the group and externally around them. And I think sometimes that noise had and has contributed to some of the, I don't know, maybe some of the weird energy, for lack of a better term, around the project. But time is a healer, and time is also a very sort of useful tool for clarity. I think when there's enough time that passes and the dust can settle, people can sort of separate a lot of maybe what was happening at the time to look back at a particular project and to find something there that they weren't able to discover at the time. And I do think that's been true of Forever. When its 20th anniversary came around 5 years ago and the group put out the first vinyl pressing of the record, for me at the time, it felt like there was sort of this sort of, I wouldn't say a groundswell, but there was sort of this coalescence of positive feelings about the record. I think a lot of people had had a chance to sit with the album. I think the way we talked about issues around culture and race with music had somewhat improved from what was happening at the time, even though this still continues to be an issue with both the Spice Girls and in a larger sort of context in the world we live in both art and other spaces. But I'll touch on that to a degree later on in our exchange here. But I just kind of wanted to just go over a few things with the record and just sort of add my 2 cents in and really celebrate this very sort of unique album. You know, to be clear, as a longtime fan, obviously subject matter expert, of the Spice Girls, both their collective work and what they've done individually, I think that they are in possession of one of the most unique canons in popular music history, particularly in their native Britain in terms of what they accomplished and what they were able to do. And I think each Spice Girls record, both the 3 that they've done as a unit and the various individual records that they've recorded, all sort of form a tapestry to tell a very unique story about what was happening at that time in popular music culture, broader popular culture, and just how they fit into that, how they drove that culture, how they shaped it, how they refined it, how they may have at different intervals maybe followed it and made it work for them. But in the end, what came out of it has been this really, really amazing sort of collection of albums and songs and different things that I think have made them sort of have one of the richest girl group sort of oeuvres that you could come across. So just to touch on a few things. Initially, this record story, it's kind of I'd say the Forever period has had about, there's about a 3-year roughly sort of period that the album sort of begins to take shape. But the first sort of real sort of impact that it had, or first idea that we got of what the record was or what it would be before it was titled, was in the mid to late spring of 1990, right before Jerry Halliwell Horner's departure from the group on May 31st. But this would have been, I think, sometime in April. They went on to a very popular British television morning show called, I believe it was, let me see here in my notes, This Morning. And in that interview, in general, they were just talking about everything that they had accomplished after they had sort of parted ways with their manager, Simon Fuller. They were winding their way through this very successful tour of mainland Europe, the Spice World Tour. And they were not too far off from getting ready to do their first tour of America. And they talked about the record sort of acting as a springboard for the girls to kind of go off, do individual projects, and come back together. But as it related to the album itself, I remember Melanie B sort of mentioning that there would be sort of 2-part, 3 or 4-part combinations. There might be solo tracks on there. And while the Forever album didn't come out in the same way that Mel B mentioned in that particular moment, it did sort of act as a portent for what would sort of happen across the lifespan of the record's creation and eventual execution and release. So, like, just to jump ahead, consider when the Spice Girls put out their first single from the album, Goodbye. On the B-sides of the record, there were 3. Let me see here. Yes. Hold on. Christmas Wrapping, We Are Family, Sisters Are Doing It For Themselves. So yes, all 3 of them were covers of different, 2 of them were girl groups, Sister Sledge, obviously We Are Family, the Waitresses, Christmas Wrapping, and then obviously the Eurythmics, Aretha Franklin duet, Sisters Are Doing It For Themselves. But across that, with the exception of We Are Family, this is just on the B-side of Goodbye, both Christmas Wrapping and Sisters Are Doing It For Themselves tied into what Mel B had mentioned in that interview. You had Melanie B and Melanie C doing the cover. It was a live cut from the Spice World Tour, the Sisters Are Doing It For Themselves cover. You also had the cited Waitresses cover for Christmas Wrapping, which was Emma and Melanie C. And I thought it was interesting just sort of watching the girls sort of expand their reach and try different things. And so, jumping back, Jerry departs. The Spice Girls make their way through the American tour, not missing a single date. Every single date was completed, which I think is incredible when you consider what was going on around them at the time. And then, of course, 2 of the ladies were pregnant with their children. But at that time, there was a lot going on. So they were beginning the writing and drafting process for Forever, or what will become the Forever album. Goodbye had a lot of its composition cut in Nashville, Tennessee. You can actually watch a section of that process in the amazing documentary, Spice Girls: A Tour Story. And they also sort of just talk about recording outside of the United Kingdom. But during that time as well, the sort of percolation of the solo careers were beginning. You had both Melanie C and Melanie B branching off to do projects with Missy Elliott and Bryan Adams, respectively. And by the time we got to Goodbye, at the end of 1998, December of that year, Melanie B had already released that first single with Missy Elliott, which was the #1 single in the country when the Spice Girls came to do their homecoming shows at Wembley for Spice World after leaving America, triumphantly, of course. And then Melanie C would also enjoy UK top 10 success with her Bryan Adams duet. And of course, all of this sort of led the way into what they would do with Goodbye, which is this really, really beautiful sort of slice of adult contemporary sort of finery. It was arguably one of the most mature songs they'd written up to that point, which had a lot to do about Jerry's departure. Now, I should take this moment to say that, it has often been rumored that the germ of this song had begun before Jerry's departure. And then obviously the Spice Girls would round out everything else in her absence, even though the song is about her leaving and on the finished product. But that's never really been confirmed by the girls. So I've often taken that as conjecture. All of this, of course, is addressed in the book, shameless plug. But returning to Melanie B and Melanie C's work with Missy Elliott and Bryan Adams, respectively, what you saw there was sort of this really interesting command that the Spice Girls had to work with people within the music industry who were very respected and came from different disciplines. Missy Elliott, obviously coming from the world of American hip hop and rhythm and blues. Bryan Adams sort of being the king or the sort of the one of the principal figures of album-oriented rock of the period, and what he was doing. And so that showed a certain level of sophistication and musical intelligence that would play into not only the solo Spice Girl turns that would come to bear in 1999, but as well as the sessions for the third album that would occur in and around their solo material. And so I've often looked at when people have brought this point up about Jerry's first record, which Schizophonic, phenomenal record. I think it's one of the pop classics of its period. That being sort of the third Spice Girls record, because if you aren't aware, the Spice Girls had two main writing production cliques that they worked with, that they wrote their music with. You had Richard Stannard, Biff Coe as he's known, and Matt Rowe on one side, and then the Absolute Boys on the other, Andy Watkins and Paul Wilson. Now, when Jerry left, Andy Watkins and Paul Wilson went with her, and they would be instrumental in the construction of her three solo records that she would do between 1999 and 2005. That's Schizophonic, Scream If You Want to Go Faster, and Passion. Richard Stannard and Matt Rowe stayed within the Spice Girls camp. And then there was another principal figure who also wrote with the girls and would be a big figure in their story, Elliot Kennedy. But he wasn't sort of connected to either of the production cliques formally. Like, he would write a song such as like Love Thing or Say You'll Be There, and then the Absolute Boys, Andy and Paul, would produce it. Elliot stayed in the Spice Girls camp, and that's an important part to come to here shortly. But returning to what I was saying, a lot of people, or some fans, let me parse that out more carefully, have commented on the fact that Schizophonic was the third Spice Girls record, and I sort of reject that notion, because what Jerry brought to that record and what she did was her own unique sound, her own songwriting perspective. It's one person versus writing and singing and recording with four other people. But I always feel that the Spice Girls' sound and even their visual image were composed of two primary things: high-end camp and really, really like round-the-way girl, cool charm. And when they were together, across those first two records, Spice and Spice World, you had a blend of those elements. But obviously, when Jerry left and the Spice Girls were standing on their own, each of the entities then both lost and gained something. Whereas the Spice Girls as a unit might have lost the high-end camp side of things, they gained, I think, more of a cool factor, and I think there was more of an artistic precision into what they were able to bring, which is not to say that they weren't precise on the first two records. I actually maintain that, though I love all three records, Spice World is my personal favorite, because that record is just such a powerhouse in terms of what they were able to do as writers, singers, who they were working with on the record, as I've mentioned, and just the execution of the project and its visual component. But Forever was sort of a maturation, further refinement, and an expansion of different elements that had been at work in their sound across the first two records. Now, Jerry, obviously, she gained more of the high-end camp, very cerebral, very sort of tongue-in-cheek at the same time, but really, really well-constructed pop genre music. But I don't think she had the same level of maybe cool, and I don't think the same level of maybe confidence as a live performer, which is a shame, because I've always felt that Jerry, as a live performer, is a lot stronger than I think she gives herself credit for. But I think she didn't have that same maybe kind of presence in the way as she did when she was with the girls, in terms of in a performance aspect, you know, being on a live stage. And that's not as a slight, it's just sort of a general observation, you know. But I think each one of those elements worked well together, but when they were separated, it created a bit of a divide. But I think it was still fascinating to listen and to see how they would evolve. And so as a result, as we move into 1999, the year of solo Spice, you know, because by this point, all of the girls are branching out, they're all doing different things. And as that's occurring, the drafting process for the Forever album begins. And it was 10 years ago, February 10th of 2015, that some of the sessions for the material that the girls cut with Elliot Kennedy made it out unceremoniously. They were leaked online. And 4 songs made their way out: Pain Proof, A Day in Your Life, If It's Loving That You Want, and right back, the Elliot Kennedy version of Right Back At Ya, which was one of the 3 songs that the girls would actually debut from the album before its release during their Christmas and Spice World shows in December of 1999. They did Woman, which is arguably, if you're a Spice Girls fan, everyone knows that it's one of the most highly requested Spice Girl tracks ever. kind of in the same wheelhouse as Who Do You Think You Are, Saturday Night Divas, and even If You Want to Have Some Fun, which is a track that would make the Forever album. Holler Holler, as it was called, it wasn't, they hadn't excised Second Holler yet, and Right Back At Ya. And then they were still cutting a lot of work with Matt and Rowe and Richard Stannard, such as Go, 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 Treasure, things like that. But ultimately, I think the girls wanted to go for what, to my ear, the finished album sounds like, was sort of a return to sort of the R&B pop froth of that first Spice Girls record, but with a little bit more of a contemporary dance, rhythmic kind of vibe that could have cut across either side of the Atlantic. But then there's also sort of a throwback twist into some of that stuff, like for a shrewd ear on things like Get Down With Me, or If You Want to Have Some Fun, which is one of two tracks, not to sort of jump out of sequence here, that they would cut with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. But both of those tracks were called to me like vintage, like Control era Janet Jackson, or Exposé's Exposure album, Point of No Return, which is a very instrumental record and combining freestyle and pop and dance. And I think that's really what they were sort of going for on that album, a record that was a bit sort of a kind of a grown woman, kind of girl gang party album with a few beautiful adult contemporary pop ballads thrown in. And it was an interesting sort of aside of what they were doing. But obviously, because the Spice Girls were taking their time putting the record together, it was sort of this slow burn. And they were sort of dealing with both professional and personal changes. In 1999, Melanie C would release her solo debut, Northern Star. Mel B was dealing with trying to record her first record, as you see here, Hot, which will come out the following fall, right before Forever. And a lot of the people that she worked with, like I said, Rodney Jerkins, who would be a major architect on the finished product, as well as Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, would sort of make their way over to the third Spice Girls record. And as the record continued to take shape, as we go into the first half of the 2000s, where the Spice Girls perform at Brits in 2000, which is one of my personal favorite performances that the girls did. Jerry was also there performing, and both Jerry and Melanie C were up for award nominations. So it was a very Spice Girls-oriented night. I think it was a really cool display of just the diversity of their sound, as well as strength and where they were commanding the British popular music pulse. But by the time they got to that period, March 2000, they were wrapping the record construction. By this point, they had done some writing in Miami, Florida, with Rodney Jerkins, and would finish some of those sides. A lot of the material they would cut with Matt Rowe, and Richard Stannard and Elliot Kennedy would not make the cut, with the exception of Goodbye and oh Lord, Right Back At You. And I'll come back to that in just a second, Right Back At You. But through the spring and summer of 2000, we're getting a lot of interesting, records. Victoria Beckham, finally steps out on her own. This is a really amazing slice of garage music, Out of Your Mind with the True Steppers and Dane Bowers. Melanie C is continuing to go from strength to strength with the Northern Star records, particularly with Never Be the Same Again, with her girl group Four-Mother, Left Eye from TLC, and then a sort of a Balearic dance workout with I Turn to You. And that's to say nothing of what Melanie B was offering up on the table with some of the stuff from the Hot album. And then Emma, if I hadn't mentioned, the previous fall had worked with 10 Out on a very cool cover of the Jam Rock Pioneers, Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians, What I Am, which, by the way, featured a remix from the extremely gifted hip-hop outfit Gang Starr on the maxi single. So I mentioned some of those different projects because there were a lot of dance and R&B elements working their way through the solo Spice Girls material, which would find their way onto that third album. And while it's probably too much to go into here, and this is where, again, I make a shameless plug for my book, because everything that you want to know about the third album, Forever, all of the different solo material I've discussed can be found within these pages. Very in-depth, and it is the only book on the market that really brings, I think, a unique perspective in relation to the impact of culture and race and how we discuss the Spice Girls and how they interacted with R&B music within their larger pop genre matrix or framework. But I think the record, there were many different things that occurred at that point. I think it was a perfect storm of a little bit of overexposure, because at that point, the Spice Girls had just been a nonstop presence, both collectively and individually, on the charts since June of 1996. You have that whole, what I call the imperial period, 1996 to 2002, where, I mean, literally, it was just a nonstop parade of Spice Girls music, most of which went on to enjoy a lot of success, but obviously the overexposure did have an impact. Mel B's record was one such casualty. But then there was also the danger of under promotion, and that dealt with kind of putting Victoria, Mel B, Emma on one side and Melanie C on the other, in terms of how to do the promotion for the third album once it was out in the world. They had, you know, the success of the Holler, Let Love Lead the Way double A-side single, which was their 9th #1 single in the United Kingdom. It went on to a lot of success in mainland Europe. It was not commercially released in the States, though it did generate some airplay, and it did impact on MTV's TRL at the time. But they did a great front-loaded campaign, but there was not a sustained promotional stump to ensure that the record had legs. There were promotional singles considered, Tell Me Why, If You Want to Have Some Fun, Weekend Love, all of which would be scrapped. When the group convened at the top of 2001 to sort of put a pause on things, all of those aborted singles, as well as the Elliott Kennedy leaked outtakes, are in a really cool breakout section in my book, which go into depth about that. And I specifically discussed the whole pop version and R&B version of Right Back At You. It's important to put out there that both of those songs are pop songs. Elliott Kennedy's version specifically had elements of R&B. That's where he was sourcing what he was doing. Both, you can hear it in the live version in Christmas and Spice World, you can hear it in the leaked version. I think the only difference was that the Spice Girls wanted to punch that up, and Elliott just didn't have the production muscle to give them what they needed, which is why they had Rodney Jerkins, Dark Child, of course, come in to do that. But I address that and the infamous remarks that Mr. Kennedy made, respectfully, of course, and just sort of try to put into context what the Spice Girls were trying to do. I think they were both trying to look forward and backward, and just really make an album that was about a progressive pop record that brought different elements that they were enjoying in their solo careers and they had enjoyed in their previous group material. And as we've seen of late in the last, let's say, 5 years, you know, stuff like Feed Your Love, See You Next Tuesday, the rap version of Say You'll Be There, which is since leaked. These are all things that have come out off of the first record. You notice that the R&B element is pronounced, it's there. I think a lot of people sort of take the more topside melody and the way the Spice Girls might present to only mean that they can only sort of be viewed in one way, but I think there's a lot more there. And again, all of that stuff is addressed in the book. So what I would advise is, if you haven't listened to this record in a while, pick it up, give it a spin. I think it's aged pretty well. There are some elements that have a little bit of the Y2K overproduction, notably Tell Me Why, though that's still a really interesting song in their repertoire. But I think it's held up and it's got a really interesting edge. And since that time, it's really found a brand new life. All of the singles have continued to play on all of the reunion tours. Melanie C, who at the time was dealing with a lot of her own mental health challenges, has since softened on the record. You know, I think there was a great clip of her and Mel B at Melanie B's 50th birthday party singing along to Holler. And I know she spoke out about how much Let Love Lead the Way had become a firm favorite of hers during the Spice World 2019 reunion tour, when she was doing some of her COVID videos in 2020 discussing her career, both as a Spice Girl and as a solo artist. I will be including, so just to sort of put this out there, if you don't follow me already, you can follow me at Instagram at Disco Wallflower, that's one word, as well as Blue Sky. On both of those pages, if you click my link tree, you'll find a link to purchase my book, as well as I'm gonna put in my standalone tributes I wrote for the Albumism platform. I currently write for Line of Best Fit, but I did do a lot of writing for Albumism for about a good 7-year period. And I did 2 great standalone retrospectives for both Melanie B's Hot and the Forever album. And I'll put those in the, they're in the link tree now. So when you go in there, you can click and go right to them and read those. And it'll kind of give you maybe a bit of a taste of what to expect if you're curious about the book. But it's definitely an album that I think is continuing to find its own life, its own energy. And I really do hope that people continue to discover this record. We're sort of dealing with an interesting period right now in the sense that the Spice Girls are doing another vinyl pressing, or red and black marble sort of vinyl. And they're alluding to possibly an additional, maybe I'm hoping, a CD reissue for the album at Christmas time, because we've received that for the first 2 records. Personally, for me, I would love to hear some of the outtakes, if it's particularly Woman, if they've got them. But I think that there's just, there's love. Oh, and then just to get this out of the way, the Forever photo shoot, I actually really love a lot of the material they were doing. In that Terry Richardson shoot, he's a very infamous photographer. He's worked with many different artists before he got to his own sort of issue, but I just feel they picked the wrong shot for the cover, but there's some other really great shots in there. Everyone's been making a big brouhaha mentioning the current vinyl production that they're doing for the reissue about the shots they used, to Dean Freeman. Dean Freeman is a photographer who's worked with both Jerry on her own and the group collectively, as well as Mel B. Dean Freeman shot the Hot album cover. They used shots of them from the Spice World Tour in America. And some fans are like, well, that's not the Forever period. I beg to differ, because on that same tour, Kenny Ho, who was their stylist at the time, commented that that particular period, they did their first major photo shoot as a quartet. And that really was, they were already making that shift, I think, sort of from what I call the caricature glamazons of Spice World to a more sophisticated, but still sexy kind of women in pop. And I think that if you trace that arc, I think from the Spice World Tour through to the Christmas and Spice World outfits, Julian McDonald was the stylist for that, up through to what they would end up doing on the Forever photo shoot. And particularly one of the photos from that, which was used for the Holler covers, one of my favorites, Victoria's Smile, and there's just so contagious. You see again that the sonic through line of progression and maturity was also expressing itself visually. And watching again sort of this influx of videos and stuff that have been popping up on social media of them on Top of the Pops and CD UK and just doing press for the album, or like I said, the Christmas and Spice World shows, and just watching the girls navigate and sort of set their own creative agenda, both sonically and visually, and not be slaves to one particular form of expression, is really what has always been at the core of what the Spice Girls have been about to me. And I think that no other record really represents that than Forever. It may not have been the record everyone wanted at the time, but I think it was the record that the Spice Girls wanted and needed to make. And I think that it's held up. So again, please pick up a copy of Record Redux Spice Girls if you want to get more of my perspective on this record, as well as this record and any of their records or songs. This does go all the way up through 2022. A 3rd edition will be in the works because we've got some new material coming from the girls. Sweat, Melanie C's 9 solo records. So we'll be looking forward to maybe a 3rd edition in the next year or 2. Additionally, as I said, I'll be putting, or rather, You can find my standalone retrospectives from 2020 for the 20th anniversaries of Hot and Forever for the Albumism platform in my link tree in my bio, the bio link. If you click it, you can access the pieces there. You can access the link to purchase the book. The hard copy, if you do want a digital copy or a signed copy, just reach out on those social media platforms or email me, recordreduxbooks@outlook.com. That's one word, Record Redux, R-E-D-U-X. You see it on my mug here. Record Redux Books @outlook.com. And drop me a line if you want to chat or ask me questions. I love meeting new people and talking about the Spice Girls. Are one of my favorite groups. And yeah, so thanks for hanging with me for about half an hour to hear me blab on about this group and this album. And again, Viva la Spice Girls, Viva la Forever. Take care, everybody.